What does a criminal conspiracy look like when trust is engineering? This is EconWorks. In this episode, we discuss a recently unsealed DOJ indictment. 4 major shipping container manufacturers allegedly conspired to artificially restrict global output. They shared live feeds from the factory cameras to ensure that members could not cheat. But their biggest legal exposure wasn't the cameras. It was the simple math of growing their membership. This podcast explores the interesting logic of corporate defection.
Imagine for a second trying to pull off a massive, highly illegal global conspiracy.
Okay.
The kind of operation designed to artificially control an entire global market. Naturally, if you're picturing this, you might think of burner phones or maybe encrypted messaging apps.
Right. Whispered conversations in underground parking garages.
Exactly. But instead of running it in the shadows, the architects of this operation decided to run it like a mundane, mid-level corporate bureaucracy.
Which is just wild to think about.
I mean, we were talking meticulously formatted Excel spreadsheets, heavily negotiated formal written contracts, penalty clauses, and an active, ongoing group chat.
A group chat, yeah. It genuinely reads like a satirical script about corporate culture.
It really does.
But peeling back the layers of this particular operation, it provides a stunning, almost uncomfortable look at how traditional business incentives break down when they're applied to an illicit enterprise.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring the fascinating and honestly, ultimately self-destructive economics of cartel formation.
It's a great topic.
It is. And our primary source for this is a brilliant, granular breakdown from an EconWorks article titled The Box Cartel. It analyzes a massive Department of Justice indictment that was unsealed just last month, in May 2026, detailing an alleged price-fixing scheme in the shipping container industry.
Right. And before we delve into the mechanical failures of this alleged cartel, it is crucial to establish the legal parameters of our discussion today.
Oh, for sure.
Everything we are evaluating today stems from the DOJ allegations outlined in that unsealed indictment. So all corporate and individual defendants involved in this case are presumed innocent unless and until they are proven guilty in a court of law.
Absolutely.
Our objective here isn't to play judge and jury. We are strictly analyzing the structural and economic game theory that the DOJ documents describe, basically treating it as a real-time economic case study.
Okay, let's unpack this. The basic allegation lays out a timeline spanning from 2019 to 2024. And the core claim is that 4 of the biggest shipping container manufacturers in the world colluded to create a cartel. Their objective was remarkably straightforward, limit global container output, halt the construction of new factory capacity, and artificially drive up their own profit margins.
Which is the classic cartel playbook.
Right. And over time, they allegedly achieved something practically unheard of in modern manufacturing. We're talking around 95% market coverage.
Yeah, that 95% coverage metric is the absolute linchpin of this entire narrative.
It's a massive number.
It is. And to comprehend why this alleged cartel eventually collapsed with such spectacular collateral damage, we first have to dissect why it was formed in that specific configuration. Why the original 4 founders couldn't simply manipulate the market on their own.
Right, because the DOJ documents point to a specific genesis moment in November 2019. Executives from 4 major companies gather at the Shenzhen headquarters of CIMC, which is China International Marine Containers.
Yes.
The other 3 at the table are Dongfang, CXIC, and another entity referred to in the indictment as Company A.
Right, the unnamed Company A.
Yeah. So together, they agreed to restrict their collective output, going so far as to mandate strict production hour limits for individual factory lines. But looking at the market data, those 4 players alone didn't have total supremacy, did they?
No, they didn't. I mean, they represented a formidable share of global dry container output, certainly, but they left a critical vulnerability on the table.
Okay.
In industrial economics, this vulnerability is known as the competitive fringe.
The competitive fringe.
Exactly. There were outsiders operating in the same space, most notably a massive player named Singamas Container Holdings, along with another unnamed entity the DOJ refers to as Company B.
So if I'm sitting at that table in Shenzhen, I might assume our combined market weight is enough to dictate terms, right?
Right.
Like, couldn't the founding 4 just leverage their dominant scale to squeeze the margins and quietly choke out Singamas and Company B?
Well, predatory pricing to starve out a rival only works if you are willing to absorb massive short-term losses to capture long-term market share. But a cartel is designed to do the exact opposite. A cartel exists to inflate short-term margins by restricting supply, and that creates a massive structural flaw when you have a competitive fringe.
Because they're leaving the door open for the outsiders.
Exactly. Container manufacturing is highly capital-intensive. If the founding four intentionally idle their own production lines to choke global supply, they are leaving millions of dollars of their own capacity unused.
Oh man, it's like trying to empty a swimming pool with a bucket while your neighbor is filling it with a hose.
That is
You have to get the neighbor on your side, or you're just doing a lot of exhausting work for absolutely zero result while they reap the benefits of the rising water level.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly.
Thanks.
If the cartel voluntarily holds back inventory, the global price for shipping containers rises. Singamas and Company B, operating outside the cartel's restrictions, would simply ramp up their own production to maximum capacity to absorb all those unfulfilled orders at the newly inflated price point.
So the outsiders capture the entire price premium generated by the cartel's sacrifice.
Precisely. The original four would bleed market share and revenue while actively enriching their direct competitors.
Wow. So recruiting Singamas and Company B wasn't a matter of like corporate greed or wanting to brag about total market domination. It was a mathematical imperative.
Yes.
The EconWorks analysis really drives this home. A subset cartel in a capital-intensive, highly competitive market is practically self-defeating.
And the founding four realized this structural reality almost immediately. By March 2020, they actively brought the fringe players into the fold.
Okay.
Singamas and Company B joined the group, and suddenly the alliance secured that magic 95% market coverage. They effectively eliminated the external threat.
But in plugging that external leak, they completely compromised their internal security. I mean, to achieve 95% market dominance, they had to dramatically expand the circle of individuals who possessed intimate knowledge of a highly illegal federal offense.
Exactly. They traded an economic vulnerability for an existential legal liability. They essentially handed their fiercest competitors the full operational architecture of their price-fixing agreement.
Which introduces an incredibly tricky psychological barrier. Because once you cross the Rubicon and invite your biggest industry rivals into a secret alliance, how on earth do you engineer a system where you can actually trust them not to cheat you?
Well, you've hit on the core paradox that governs all illicit markets. To truly understand the mechanics of this paranoia, we have to look at the work of Nobel laureate George Stigler.
Oh, okay.
Back in 1964, Stigler published a groundbreaking theory observing that cartels are fundamentally unstable, not because of human morality, but because of basic mathematical incentives.
Meaning the structure itself is rigged to fail, regardless of how loyal the members claim to be.
Precisely. Stigler pointed out that the very mechanism the cartel relies on, which is an artificially inflated price, creates an overwhelming rational incentive for every single member to secretly defect.
Because the price is so high.
Right. If everyone else in the alliance is dutifully restricting their output to keep the global price high, the profit margin on every marginal unit you secretly overproduce and sell is astronomical.
Oh, wow.
The gap between your production cost and the artificial cartel price is basically free money. So the cartel's success is the exact mechanism that constantly tempts its members to destroy it.
That is fascinating. Knowing that everyone is heavily incentivized to stab each other in the back, this specific group went to shocking administrative lengths to force compliance.
They really did.
They didn't rely on coded language or gentlemen's agreements. According to the indictment, they drafted and signed a literal, formal written contract.
A written contract.
Yeah, which they call the moon-gazing fund.
The audacity of naming it the moon-gazing fund aside.
I know, right?
From an organizational design perspective, it was a desperate attempt to create a binding commitment mechanism. They established an actual financial penalty pool. If a member was caught overproducing beyond their allotted quota, they had to pay a concrete financial penalty into this fund.
I have to pause here because this logic is staggering. A written, signed contract for a criminal conspiracy. I mean, don't write it down, the very first rule of conducting any kind of illicit business?
You would think so.
You would think executives at this level would rely on covert signaling, not a signed document that a prosecutor could literally hold up in court.
In a normal environment, yes. But they were facing a severe principal-agent problem within their own ranks.
How so?
In a volatile global shipping market, if your company suddenly loses a major client order, You have no way of knowing if that was due to natural macroeconomic demand dropping, or if your cartel partner secretly undercut you to steal the business.
Because you can't verify it.
Right. Ambiguity breeds immediate distrust. They felt they needed objective, undeniable data to prove compliance, which meant formalizing the rules in writing.
And their quest for objective data didn't stop at contracts, did it? The cameras. We absolutely have to talk about the cameras.
Yes, the cameras.
The indictment details the installation of 87 surveillance cameras across 49 different production lines.
What's fascinating here is that the cartel invested so heavily in the surveillance infrastructure precisely because they recognized their own inherent fragility.
Yeah.
The cameras weren't pointing at the perimeter to keep out corporate spies. They were pointed directly at the factory floors so the competitors could monitor each other's output in real time.
You might be picturing a sophisticated, centralized security room, but the reality is so much more mundane and honestly absurd.
Extremely mundane.
The DOJ documents describe corporate executives literally emailing screenshots of a rival company's factory footage to conduct ad hoc compliance audits.
It's hard to believe.
Just imagine the sheer bureaucratic audacity of taking a screenshot of a live feed, attaching it to an email to your biggest competitor and saying, "Hey, I see sparks flying on line 3. You're supposed to be throttled down today."
It highlights a complete blind spot in their risk assessment. By attempting to solve the Stigler instability problem with high-definition surveillance and data tracking, they unintentionally functioned as their own forensic investigators. They engineered a perfect multi-camera, time-stamped documentary of their own antitrust violations.
They essentially built, categorized, and maintained the prosecution's evidence room for them.
Yes, they did.
But looking at the EconWorks charts from this period, we have to acknowledge a very uncomfortable reality. Before the inevitable collapse, this absurd apparatus of spy cameras and penalty funds actually worked.
It did.
And it worked spectacularly well.
The market distortion they achieved was undeniable. The financial yield generated by this infrastructure was unprecedented in the container industry.
The numbers from 2021 to 2022 are just jaw-dropping. The price of a standard 20-foot shipping container, which is a foundational building block of global trade, skyrocketed from about $1,600 to over $3,500.
They more than doubled the price of an essential global commodity, forcing every shipping company and ultimately every consumer to absorb that premium.
And the profit capture for the manufacturers was staggering. Let's look at CIMC, the company that hosted that initial Shenzhen meeting. Their net profit surged from around $19.8 million to an astronomical $1.75 billion.
A near hundredfold increase.
A hundredfold increase in just a couple of years. When a company's balance sheet explodes like that, it fundamentally alters the corporate reality.
Absolutely. Because a hundredfold profit increase brings intense scrutiny from shareholders, from regulators, and from the market at large.
Yeah, people start asking questions.
Right. And that massive influx of capital brought a parallel surge in intense, suffocating paranoia. As the profits peaked, the executives began to realize the sheer volume of the paper trail they had manufactured to enforce their internal trust.
The timeline shifts dramatically at this point. The panic really sets in. You see executives frantically deleting internal emails. They begin heavily redacting presentation slides before board meetings.
You're scared.
They explicitly ban the use of words like alliance in official communications because, as one executive nervously noted, the term was sensitive under antitrust law.
They were acutely aware of the illegality of their actions, and the pressure caused them to make severe tactical errors. In May 2020, an executive actually sent a formal email to a specialized refrigerated container producer, a reefer producer.
Oh, right, inviting them to join.
Exactly, inviting them to participate in their, quote, industry self-discipline actions.
The industry self-discipline. I mean, the euphemisms they use are incredible. They couldn't just say price fixing, so they dressed it up as market hygiene.
But the phrasing didn't fool anyone. That third-party producer didn't just ignore the overture. They formally rejected the invitation in writing, explicitly citing their corporate compliance policy against anti-competitive behavior.
Yikes.
So now the cartel has an external, non-participating entity holding a written, time-stamped record proving the conspiracy exists.
It's the equivalent of leaving a voicemail admitting to a felony on a stranger's machine and just hoping they delete it.
Very apt comparison.
But despite these massive red flags, they simply couldn't stop. The timeline shows that by November 2023, which is years into this era of extreme paranoia, a Singama's executive is still presenting highly incriminating spreadsheets to their CEO.
Right.
And the DOJ actually possesses copies of these spreadsheets, which detail the total allowable capacity and specific quota limits broken down by every single factory line for every conspirator.
They found themselves entirely trapped by their own compliance architecture. They couldn't abandon the spreadsheets, the quotas, and the cameras without the cartel immediately devolving into a price war. But keeping those systems meant actively maintaining a ticking time bomb of federal evidence.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Looking at this from a purely human behavior and risk management standpoint, at what point does the suffocating paranoia of monitoring 87 spy cameras, constantly scrubbing emails, and managing illegal quotas on Excel spreadsheets outweigh the benefit of those billion-dollar margins?
That is the ultimate calculus every cartel member eventually faces. And the deep, tragic irony for the Founding Four is that their paranoia was entirely justified.
Really?
Yes, because the mechanism of their destruction wasn't an external investigator stumbling onto a secret. It was baked into their business model from the very beginning. The exact companies they were mathematically forced to recruit to solve the competitive fringe problem held the key to their downfall.
The outsiders. The latecomers. Company A and Company B.
Correct. And this introduces a highly sophisticated economic concept that the DOJ leverages brilliantly in modern enforcement. The leniency paradox.
The leniency paradox.
Right. Global antitrust enforcement agencies rely heavily on corporate leniency policies. The core doctrine of these programs is to offer total immunity or drastically reduced financial penalties to the very first conspirator who breaks ranks, walks into the prosecutor's office, and confesses.
Wow. It's the classic prisoner's dilemma applied at a macroeconomic scale.
And standard game theory dictates that this leniency creates a perpetual race to the prosecutor's office. It makes maintaining a cartel incredibly psychologically taxing because you can never be certain if your partner is currently negotiating a plea deal.
You're always looking over your shoulder.
Exactly. But the EconWorks piece highlights a really specific, underappreciated vulnerability in these leniency programs when dealing with expanded cartels.
The late entrant dynamic.
Exactly. Let's revisit the timeline. The Founding Four initiate the cartel, take on all the initial risk, and then realize they need Singamas and Company B to make the math work.
Right, to get to 95%.
For a late entrant, accepting the invitation isn't just a defensive move, it is a massive strategic premium. The EconWorks article refers to this as an unintended entry subsidy.
Break the mechanics of that entry subsidy down for me. Why is joining late a premium?
Well, when a company joins an already stabilized cartel, they immediately reap all the massive, artificially inflated profits without having shouldered the initial logistical and legal risk of organizing the collusion.
They just walk into a gold mine.
Yes. But more dangerously for the founders, the late entrant holds the ultimate asymmetric exit strategy. They can comfortably sit in the cartel, collect their windfall margins, and the very moment they sense regulatory heat or internal instability, they exercise their leniency option. They defect to the authorities.
And because the founders were so obsessed with engineering objective trust, the late entrant doesn't just walk into the DOJ with a vague confession.
Yeah.
They walk in fully armed.
They possess the moon-gazing fund contract. They have the exported group chat logs. They have access to the 87 camera feeds and the total allowable capacity spreadsheets.
Oh, man.
The cartel, by structural necessity, handed its newest members both the indisputable evidence of the crime and an overwhelming financial incentive to trade that evidence for legal immunity. The original founders, heavily implicated from day one, simply do not have that same clean, viable exit option.
So the Founding Four effectively invited someone to a highly lucrative bank robbery, handed them a duffel bag of cash, gave them the high-definition security footage of the planning meetings, and then were completely blindsided when that person walked down to the police station to claim the reward money.
The structural economics of this situation heavily incentivize exactly that betrayal. While the DOJ has not explicitly named the informants on the record, the two unnamed entities in the indictment, Company A and Company B, are analytically the most probable sources of this devastatingly thorough documentation.
Which accelerates us to the final dramatic climax of the DOJ's timeline. In January 2024, the operational period of the alleged conspiracy officially fractures.
The trust evaporates entirely.
Behind the scenes, international enforcement agencies begin mobilizing based on the accumulated evidence. And then on April 14, 2026, the invisible operation spills violently into the public eye.
A high-ranking executive from Singamas is intercepted while transiting through Charles de Gaulle Airport in France. Acting on a coordinated extradition request from the United States, Authorities arrest the executive right there in the international terminal.
Just a few weeks later, on May 19, 2026, the massive federal indictment is unsealed. The billion-dollar profit surges, the 87 factory floor cameras, the deeply ironic moon-gazing fund. All of the meticulous corporate bureaucracy laid completely bare for the global market to dissect.
It is a stunning systemic collapse. But as the structural analysis demonstrates, it was a collapse driven by equal parts aggressive regulatory enforcement and the cartel's own unavoidable self-engineered vulnerabilities.
So what does this all mean? We've traced this incredible journey from a quiet, secretive meeting in a Shenzhen boardroom to a highly public federal arrest at a Parisian airport.
It's quite the arc.
It really is. And to me, the story of the container cartel serves as an absolute masterclass in how solving an immediate economic problem can directly engineer a catastrophic legal failure.
Yeah.
They were mathematically forced to expand their membership to control the fringe supply, which inherently expanded their legal exposure. They installed high-definition cameras and drafted penalty contracts to enforce trust, which created an undeniable time-stamped paper trail. Every seemingly rational business solution was just a new, more lethal problem in disguise.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves something profound about the architecture of human systems. In a world defined by complex interactions, trust cannot simply be engineered by brute force, extensive data collection, and relentless surveillance.
You can't just mandate it.
Right. The cartel founders operated under the assumption that if they just monitored enough variables, if they just had enough cameras, spreadsheets, and financial penalties, they could systematically conquer human nature and override the temptation to cheat.
Right.
But the more rigid systems you build to force compliance, the more vulnerabilities, paper trails, and pressure points you create within the very foundation of that system.
It's a heavy, undeniable lesson about the illusion of control. And it leaves me with one final thought, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
Okay.
We just spent a significant amount of time analyzing how a massive, highly motivated, incredibly wealthy organization completely failed to use total surveillance and data tracking to keep its own loyal members aligned. The paranoia of that surveillance ultimately destroyed them.
It did?
So if absolute total surveillance couldn't make a highly profitable criminal enterprise function smoothly, what does that mean for the perfectly legal, everyday corporations right now who are installing keystroke trackers, screen recorders, and webcam monitors to aggressively track the productivity of their remote workforce? Are they actually optimizing efficiency, or are they just engineering their own catastrophic breakdown of trust?
This raises a very important question about the long-term viability of surveillance in the future of the workplace.
Something to seriously think about the next time your laptop webcam light blinks on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Econ Works. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at Econ Works, thanks for listening.